I'm here with Tash. We're in the garage next to my house, which I've tidied up and turned into a makeshift studio. It's about 3 meters wide by about 6 meters long, so quite a small space. You don't really need a room quite as long as this. You can do much of what I'm about to show you in a 3 or 4 meter long room. But the extra length of this garage is useful for the, well, not garage, studio, of course, is useful to make room for the video lights. It's also a bit cluttered. I've got our barbecue in here, my bicycle, cabinets and so on. I haven't cleared them out to demonstrate what you can achieve in a small space. Okay, plus I'm a bit lazy. I'm using a grey pop-up background. This one is probably a tad darker than mid-grey. I like grey because I can make it go lighter or darker as required, but many backgrounds would be fine, especially if you've got a bit of space, which will allow you to make it go darker. I'll talk more about that in the next lecture. This one is made by a company called Light, and I put a link to several backgrounds in the shopping list supplementary material. My modifier that I'm going to start off using, is this one. It's a 43-inch Westcott, but they also do a 60-inch one, since it's quite big. And this one's better in a confined space, plus it's easier to manage. Remember, the larger the light source, the softer the light. And this one's pretty big, especially when brought in close. In later lectures, I'll be going outside, but an indoor shoot is a great place to start. It's a little brighter than I'd like in here because I've got the video lights on, but the ambient light should be easy enough to manage. I wanted to start off with an indoor session because when you go outside during the day, you have far more ambient light to deal with, and so you're kind of living on the technical edge. I want to keep things simple to start with. So, what are my camera settings? I've set my shutter speed to 250th of a second. That's the maximum sync speed on this camera. Your camera sync speed may be a 1/60th or 200th of a second. You'll have to check your manual. Setting the shutter speed to the maximum sync speed ensures that you reduce the ambient light as much as possible. This is just boring fluorescent light in here. I don't want any of that getting into the picture. For all of the indoor shoots, and probably for most of the outdoor photos, the shutter speed is going to stay at 2/50th of a second. I won't ever be changing it, except by accident. I'm using a 50mm f1.4 lens, but it's a crop sensor camera, so it's a 35mm equivalent of about 75mm. Now normally I'd set the aperture to f4. That would allow the flash to do less work and would blur the background, if I had one that was worth blurring. But this one isn't. But because it's quite bright in here, I'm going to use f5.6. It's probably just as well anyway, because I know many people watching this will be using a kit lens, you know, the one that came with the camera. Kit lenses are nearly all variable aperture. You can tell that because the markings on the lens barrel will say something like f3.5 to 5.6. As you zoom these lenses, the aperture will change from when you're wide open. So f5.6 is a nice safe one to use that won't change. But if you're using a fast prime lens like this one, or have a more professional zoom lens, I'd recommend starting off at f4. ISO 200 or 400 are my normal working ISOs. The quality is great before the images start to get a little noisy, and it also means my flash doesn't have to work so hard. It also gives me a couple of extra stops or two of light over and above 100. You may prefer a lower ISO to reduce the noise, especially if you're using an older DSLR or a compact or bridge camera. Because of the video lights, as I said before, it's quite bright in here and I don't want to bring in too much ambient light, so I'll use ISO 200. So my settings are 2/50th of a second, f5.6, ISO 200. My usual settings indoors are 2/50th, f4, ISO 400. They're the ones I recommend you start with. I don't even think too much about it anymore. Those settings always work. I also start off at least with the light the same kind of distance to the subject, more or less, maybe 4 or 5 feet. So of the 5 aspects of exposure, shutter speed, aperture, ISO, flash to subject distance and flash power, the only real variable is the flash power. So I'll just adjust the flash power based on the initial shots. By the way, many flashes allow you to zoom the head, which then throws out a narrow beam of light. I always set the zoom to its widest setting. On this flash it's 24mm. That will fill the umbrella. But if you're shooting through a 42 umbrella and your flash zoom setting is on, say, 85mm, you might as well be shooting through a 24-inch umbrella. Some flashes have these wide diffusers. I don't use them for this type of work. They're not really necessary, and it just loses you a little bit of power. What else is there? Well, I'm shooting in the RAW mode, and my white balance is set to flash. When you're triggering the off-camera flash, the camera doesn't know that you're using flash. So if you have the camera set to the auto white balance, you can get small variations in the colour as you reframe or your subject changes clothes. So set it to the flash. That's the lightning bolt preset. If you don't have one of those, use the sunny preset. It's quite similar to flash in terms of colour, or in terms of colour temperature, I should say. Once you change the light to subject distance, you have to change the aperture, or change the ISO, or change the flash power. Remember, shutter speed makes no difference to the flash exposure. I like to keep to a routine and keep it nice and simple, so I nearly always just change the flash power. I don't have to worry if I get stuck. Do I do this or do I do that? I only ever change the aperture or ISO if I've run out of flash options. For example, if I were on flash power and the image was still underexposed, but that never really happens in small indoor photo sessions. Before we start to shoot proper, I just want to make sure that none of this ambient light is going to be in the shot. So I've turned off the flash for a second, and we'll just take a shot just to make sure everything goes dark. Yeah, that's pretty much pitch black, and just about see a hint of Tasha's face there. That's perfect. Before I put the umbrella up, I think I'll just take a couple of shots as well, which we can compare using just a bare flash without the umbrella on it, so we can compare them later on. Let's give that a try. Just look at me, Tash. It's great. A couple more. Okay, that's great. We'll look at those later on and compare them. So let's put the umbrella on. That just goes through there. Tighten it up. I don't normally push the shaft all the way through, otherwise you can kind of get a hot spot. So I normally put about 4 inches of the shaft through. So we're all set with our aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and so on. But what do we set the flash power to? Well, who knows? It's going to be a guess, isn't it? You know, to start off with, but we have to start somewhere. So I think what we'll do, let's, I'll tell you what, let's do it randomly. So Tash, you tell me when to stop. Okay, I'm just going to change it randomly. Just say when. Okay. I have had a quick sneak to see what the flash power is, but let's say, pretend I don't know. So let's give this a try. All the settings are the same, but we don't know about the flash power. We're kind of in the ballpark, but Tash is looking too dark, isn't she? And looking at, again, just to confirm, the flash power was 32. So it's probably about 2 stops overexposed. But let's go down to 16th power first of all, see what happens. Okay, set it to 16th power. A little bit brighter, but still underexposed. Now we go to 8th power. Right, let's give this a try. Yeah, that looks pretty good now. Another way of checking the exposure without using a flash meter is to make sure you're defocused, first of all, to go right up to the subject, fill the frame with the face, take another shot, and then look at the histogram. You can see that the centre line is mid-grey, and the pixels to the right of that are Tash's face, and they're about 1 stop over. So that looks about right, because obviously Tash's face isn't mid-grey, it's brighter than that. So that looks about right. So we've got a good exposure now. Let's take a few shots. Just looking at these images afterwards on my computer, I'm happy with them. They look pretty good. You can see the soft shadow under Tasha's chin and wrapping around the right side of her cheek. Compared to one of the earlier photos taken with a bare flash, you can see that her skin looks softer and less shiny. Also, just look at that harsh shadow under her chin on the bare flash image. But although the umbrella light was softer, it wasn't really that soft, and that's because it was 5 or 6 feet away from Tasha, so it wasn't a particularly large light source. I'll be dealing with that in the next lecture. So we've got some good basic shots to start off with. So what can we do next? Well, let's try moving the light around to see what difference it makes to the light on Tasha's face. Now, normally, I would like to be able to keep the light the same distance so that I don't have to mess around with the flash power, apertures and so on. But we haven't got much width, so we might have to adjust the flash power if the light comes a little bit closer. But let's say try the light over here. Let's see what happens. Get over. Oh. I hope you're laughing with me and not at me. Right, the flash is a lot closer now, so I'll dial down the power of the flash. So I was on an 1/8. Let's make it, say, a 1/16. So we've now got some split lighting. One side of the face is lit, the other side is in shadow. Not the sort of light I would use normally, but it's a look, and, you know, if you like it, keep using it. So now let's try bringing the light round to the front, keeping it on the camera axis. This should give a more flattering light. Let's give this a try. That's probably a little bit underexposed because the light has been moved further away. So let's bring that down. This is where, if you've got a trigger that you can change the power from the camera position, it really helps. Let's make that now an 1/8 power. So you can see I'm not changing any settings on the camera. Yeah, this type of light is quite flattering, although admittedly it has gone a little dark under her chin. I'm really just trying to demonstrate the different looks you can get by simply moving the light and adjusting the flash power accordingly. I'm going to try for a much more moodier type of look. So I've put the light behind Tash, pointing towards me now, and I've brought down the umbrella a little bit as well, and I've had to reduce the exposure by probably a couple of stops. So I think we're at 32 power. Let's see how this looks. I'm going to cover up the lens because I think I might get a bit of flare otherwise from the flash. Yeah, that's given us a nice moody look. So you can see just by moving the light around, we can get completely different type of effects. And I haven't changed any settings on the camera. I've only adjusted the flash power. So we got some pretty good basic shots there for the first video. And in future lectures, I'll be refining a technique to try and get even more dramatic type of photos and a more flattering light as well. One thing I forgot to mention was the height of the umbrella. That's quite important. If it's too low, then you're going to expose all of this area around the chin and so on, which you don't really want to do. You really want to cast a shadow around that kind of area. Also, you want it above eye level to brighten up the eyes, get the colour in the eyes. And you can usually tell if you've got it right, but the catch lights in the eyes should be around the 10-2 or the 10 pass position. That's a good indication that you've got the umbrella or the light about right. You saw there how the light changes as we move around the umbrella, giving you a different light. Some of that you might like, some of that you might not like. Just use the ones you do like, get rid of the ones if you're not happy with that type of light. See you in the next film.